Well, our today's topic is cross pollination or xenogamy or allogamy. Okay, these all terms mean one and same thing. So, the simple definition of cross pollination is it is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower belonging to genetically different plants flowers. Okay, here in the figure you can see there are two flowers. Let's suppose this is flower X, this is flower Y. This flower is present on plant A, this is present on plant B. Obviously, these two plants they have different genetic constitutions. They are genetically different. When pollination takes place between two flowers, say from anthers of this flower, pollen get transferred to the stigma of that flower, or reciprocally from anther of this flower to stigma of that flower. This is known as cross pollination. Okay, this is known as cross pollination. You know, cross pollination, it is also named as xenogamy or allogamy. So, what is the meaning of xenogamy? Xenogamy means xenos means strange and gamos means marriage. It is a sort of marriage taking place between two strangers. Or allogamy, allos means other and gamos means marriage, and its meaning is it is a marriage, it is a pollination agent event which does not happen within itself. Instead, it occurs with some other members which are different. So, cross pollination, you know, it happens between flowers which are located apart, which are present on two different plants at some distance. So, there is obviously the need of some agents, and these agents are known as pollinating agents or pollination agencies. Now, the pollination agents are pollination agencies. In angiosperms, the pollen they are immotile, they are not itself capable to move large distances. Okay, they are not able to move to cover a large distance on their own. Instead, they have to be carried to the stigma of the other flower by the external pollinating agents. And depending upon the nature of pollinating agents, they have been divided into two types: biotic agents and abiotic agents. Under biotic agents, we have the living organisms with that assist in pollination, like insects, birds, snails, in some cases, bats. Okay, and abiotic pollinating agents, it mainly includes wind and water. These are the two abiotic factors that bring about pollination in some plant species. Today, we will specifically talk about abiotic pollination. The pollination brought about by abiotic agencies, this constitutes abiotic pollination. It is further of two types: anaemophily and hydrophily. Anaemophily means pollination which is brought about by wind, and hydrophily means pollination with the help of water. Now, what is anaemophily? We will talk about anaemophily in today's part. Uh, it is derived from Greek word anemos, which means wind, and philin to love. So, those plants which love to get pollinated with the help of wind, they can be called as anaemophilous plants. In anaemophily, transfer of pollen grain it takes place through the agency of wind, and there are many plant species that show anaemophily, like we have coconut palm, date palm, maize. There are many other grasses, cannabis, urtica, mercurialis. These are the plant species which show anaemophily. The air currents they pick up the pollen from the dehiscing anthers and carry the same to different places. The anthers which dehisce, which rupture, they release the pollen grains. These pollen grains are taken away by the wind currents to some different places. The receptive stigmas which are present in the flowers located at a different place, they pick up the pollen grains which are floating in the air. They pick up the pollen grains. Okay, so you know that in the transit, okay, the pollen grains they have to cover a large distance. There are chances that the pollen grains they may not land on the suitable stigma. They may get lost. To withstand this loss of pollen grains, the anaemophilous flowers they show some structural adaptations to ensure that pollination happens. Okay, since the pollen grains they have to cover a large distance, the anaemophilous flowers they show some structural adaptations to ensure that pollination happens. Anaemophily, it is a non-directional and wasteful process. You know that a lot of pollen grains they are lost in the transit. It is a non-directional process. Non-directional means if this is a flower, this is another flower. Pollen grain gets transferred from anther of this flower to the stigma of that flower. The pollen grain can also get transferred from anther of this flower to the stigma of that flower. So it does not always happen in the same direction. It can happen in many directions. This is what means non-directional and wasteful process. A large number of pollen grains they are lost. So the chances that a pollen grain will reach on the right stigma they are least. Now the characters of anaemophilous flowers. There are many characters of anaemophilous flowers. The first one is the flowers are small and inconspicuous. They are packed in inflorescences. The flowers are small and inconspicuous. They are not apparent. They are not large. These are the characters of flowers. We show pollination by insects, pollination by birds. Okay. So flowers they are not required to be large and conspicuous. The non-essential parts like sepals and petals they are absent or reduced. Sepals and petals they are meant to give support. They are meant to attract the pollinators. Okay, since the anaemophilous flowers they do not need to attract insects. Their petals and sepals they are either absent or reduced. The flowers are usually colorless. They are nectarless and they are odorless. There is no need to produce such substances. The flowers are developed above the foliage, usually in hanging spikes or catkins. These are the types of inflorescences. Okay, we have already discussed these inflorescences in our previous class. I mean in the 11th class. So the flowers they are developed above the foliage, above the leaves, usually in the form of hanging spikes or catkins. The anthers are extrose and versatile. Extrose means they are located like these are the flowers. Okay, these are flowers. Anthers are located this way. They face at the periphery of the flowers, so that when they will rupture, the pollen grains they will not fall on the stigma of the same flower. Okay, they will fall in the air and then later on they will be carried by the wind currents. And they are versatile. Versatile means here this is when the anthers they are attached their point of attachment is right in the middle. When they are attached to the when the filament is attached at the middle point, okay, of sorry, I will make it more clear. This is the point of attachment of filament. This is filament, this is anther. When the filament is attached right in the middle of the anther, okay, this point of attachment it allows the anthers to move freely. This is what versatile means. Okay, it allows the anther to move freely, to swing freely when wind currents are there. Okay, this allows the pollen grains to move with the air currents. I will repeat this. The anthers they are extrose and they are versatile. Versatile means the filament is connected to the anther right in the middle here, and this attachment, this specific attachment allows the anthers to swing freely in the wind. The anthers they burst forcefully and suddenly to throw the pollen grains in air as in urtica it is just like a gunpowder mechanism. In most of the Anaemophilous flowers, the anthers they burst forcefully and suddenly, so that the pollen grains they get sprinkled, they get dispersed in the air. The pollen grains are small, smooth, non-sticky, and light. They may have air sacs or wings so that they can float in air for long distances. And it has been found that the pollen grains of pinus plant, okay, they cover a distance of 1300 kilometers. One more character is very large number of pollen grains are produced because they lose a large number of pollen grains in the transit. Okay, they lose a large number of pollen grains. To ensure pollination happens, they produce a large number of pollen grains. For example, 5 lakh pollen grains per flower in cannabis, 135 million by mercurialis, and 25 million by a tassel of maize. Okay, since since the plants know that a large number of their pollen grains they are lost, they get placed on unstable surfaces. Okay, the chances that a pollen grain will reach the right stigma they are least. They produce a large number of pollen grains. Okay, the pollens are usually dry and wet. These pollen they are usually dry and wet. The stigma are the stigma are exerted. They are hairy and feathery, or branched to capture the pollen grains. The stigma they are exerted. They are exerted means they are placed outwards. They are placed away from the flower so that they can capture the pollen grains that float in the air. They are hairy. This also helps us in pollen capture. They can be feathery, and all these things they help the stigmas to capture the pollen grains. Anaemophily is common in grasses. You can find anaemophily most common in case of grasses. In grasses, the flowers are borne on long axes above the tuft of leaves, and that is why you can find the flowers in grasses they are above the tuft of leaves. You can usually find flowers in case of grasses they are above the tuft of leaves. One very important point about anaemophily is associated with reduction in number of ovules per ovary, and this is a logical point. If there would have been large number of ovules per ovary, most of them would remain unfertilized because the chances that a pollen will rest on the stigma they are very minimum. If an ovary contains many ovules, the chances that all the ovules are fertilized it will be least. So obviously these plants they tend to have just a single ovule per ovary. In grasses, for example, you can see there is just one ovule per ovary. Grasses में आप देख सकते हो which are anaemophilous. The reason that they contain only one ovule per ovary is that they are anaemophilous. Okay, so this is all about anaemophily. I hope you all understand this. In the next part we are going to talk about hydrophily. Till then, take care.